Some of Lobotomy Corporation's weakest abnormalities would be classified as Euclid. Not the A-lifts, not even most of the WAs, I mean the TETHs. The things Lob Corp looks at and says, yeah, this is manageable, while the SCP Foundation looks at the same abnormality and says, we can't leave this thing alone for 5 minutes without something going horribly wrong. That makes them Euclid in the eyes of the Foundation. This is the key distinction between these two classification systems. The argument we have here, the thing we have to decide, is whether the thoughts, choices, and behavior make the Abno's containment unreliable. Because Euclid is where the Foundation starts asking things like, how dangerous is this thing? How confident are we that this thing will keep behaving when nobody is looking? Before we get into the list, I owe you guys a quick apology. In the last video, I did not explain clearly enough that this was going to be a series. The original plan was to classify the entire Lobotomy Corporation abnormality roster into one video. However, that would have been several hours long, and by the end I would have sounded like a madman being held hostage by the SCP Foundation themselves, and most of you would have abandoned me somewhere around the 4th Euclid on the list. So we split it into 3 videos. The first video covered abnormalities the Foundation would classify as safe. This episode is Euclid, and next week we are going to be dealing with Keter. This is where the containment procedures stop feeling like, well, procedures and start feeling like desperate prayers written by people who have already watched the emergency response team get eaten or ran through by a unicorn or some shit. So yes, this is a series, 3 videos, 3 classic SCP classifications. Safe is done, Euclid starts now, and Keter is next week. Euclid is not simply the medium danger category. That is the first thing we need to clear up. Euclid covers abnormalities that are insufficiently understood, inherently unpredictable, expensive to contain, and too unreliable to leave unattended. The Foundation can contain them, usually, but the procedure may require active supervision, specific personnel, regular checkups, backup plans, more backup plans, and one exhausted researcher whose entire job is making sure nobody accidentally presses the wrong button. The locked box test explains it pretty well, and if you put an abnormality into a box and you leave it alone, and you know exactly what's going to happen, that points towards safe. If you lock it in a box and think, I hope it stays in there, I hope it does not change its behavior, and I hope that nobody has to open the box, that's more Euclid territory. And the abnormality does not have to be apocalyptic. It does not have to be stronger than a WA. It simply has to be unreliable enough that the Foundation cannot treat containment as a solved problem. That distinction is going to be the backbone of this entire video. And this is where Lobotomy Corporation's threat levels need some context. Lob Corp was not using its classifications to answer the exact same questions the SCP Foundation was. Its threat levels were part of the facility's operational system. They were connected to what the abnormality produced, how much ENKEPHALIN the facility could extract, and what kind of work and management the abnormality demanded. The game's datasheets connect the energy production values to the abnormality's threat level rating. That connection matters because LobCorp's ranking is not a clean measurement of how difficult the SCP Foundation would find an abnormality to contain. It's closer to how much can we get out of this thing and how much punishment comes attached to the process. The SCP Foundation is looking at containment reliability. Lobotomy Corporation is looking at containment reliability, employee survival, energy production, and whether the abnormality can help keep the facility running before it turns the welfare department into a crime scene. Those systems overlap, however. They do not match. This is why a TETH can be a Euclid and why a WA can sometimes remain safe. LobCorp is grading the work environment, the Foundation is grading the box. Now this is the part I need to address because roughly 30 of you brought it up in the comments of the last video, and the argument was if the abnormality can think, it automatically has to be Euclid. I understand where that comes from. The SCP Foundation generally treats sapient and autonomous anomalies as more difficult to contain because a thinking entity can make decisions, change its behavior, and act outside of a predictable routine. But sapience is not a magic button that changes the classification. It is a major warning sign. The Foundation still has to ask what that intelligence actually means for containment. Can the anomaly make decisions that affect its containment? Can it intentionally disobey? Can it change its behavior? Can it manipulate personnel? Can it leave the box without anyone activating it? And can it create a new problem simply because it decides to? Those are questions that matter. SCP-085 is sapient, animated, two-dimensional woman with her own personality. She is cooperative, restricted to a specific media, and classified as safe. SCP-507 is an intelligent, cooperative man who randomly shifts between alternate dimensions, and he is also classified as safe because the Foundation has a workable containment model around him, even though his ability is wildly unpredictable. That example is especially useful because SCP-507 is not predictable in the ordinary sense. The Foundation simply understands how to manage the unpredictability. A sapient anomaly can be argued to remain safe when it's cooperative, restricted, and reliably contained. Safe does not mean the abnormality has no mind. Safe means the Foundation has a reliable enough system for containing it. So when someone says the abnormality can think, therefore it has to be Euclid, the answer is not entirely. That is evidence for your argument. It is not the entire case. Sapience can support a Euclid classification. It does not complete the argument by itself. So yes, this can affect some of the safe placements from the previous video, and it can at least be used as an argument. If an abnormality is clearly capable of independent thought, planning, manipulation, and deliberate action, then it can be argued that the abnormality belongs in Euclid, regardless of its Lob Corp threat level. But having a personality is not automatically the same thing as demonstrating independent choice. Some abnormalities have names, faces, dialogue, recognizable emotions, or fixed reactions to the employee's actions. That gives them personality. It does not necessarily prove that they are making decisions outside of their established rules. Child of the Galaxy has a defined token system. The danger comes from mishandling the token holder, not necessarily from the abnormality demonstrating the new plan every time someone enters the room. The Woodsman has a specific breach sequence tied to its work and the employee's temperance. Horrifying, absolutely. But whether that demonstrates independent thought can be argued either way. The Foundation would investigate whether these abnormalities are thinking entities or whether they're running on fixed responses that only look personal from the outside. If the evidence proves that they're making autonomous choices, then their placement can be argued upwards. If the behavior is fixed, repeatable, and fully controlled by a reliable procedure, keeping them in safe remains a defensible position. You need to demonstrate that the thinking creates an actual containment problem for me to be willing to change the placements. Alright, rant over, guys. Why are there low-level abnormalities here? Now, here's the thing, this list gets embarrassing for LobCorp. Some of the weakest abnormalities in the game are in Euclid, and if I'm looking at my list right, there might be a couple of them in next week's video also. Scorch Girl, Meat Lantern, Fragment of the Universe are all Teth. These are not Euclid because they secretly have the destructive power of a Wa. They are Euclid because the Foundation cannot confidently lock them away and assume the problem is over. And that is what makes this classification system so funny. LobCorp says this is a low threat. The Foundation says, fine, put it in a box. Then the abnormality does something strange, violates the expected pattern, or creates a second containment issue that nobody accounted for, and now the Foundation has created a new department with 3 revised protocols and one researcher frantically writing a sentence that says, do not allow the entity to actually interact with fucking anything. This is the official way the Foundation surrenders, by throwing their hands in the air and saying, fuck it. So we are starting with Schadenfreude because this is the kind of abnormality that immediately exposes the difference between the threat level and containment difficulty. It is not enough to ask whether Schadenfreude can destroy the facility. The Foundation has to ask whether its behavior remains reliable when personnel stop actively managing the situation. If its containment depends on observation, employee positioning, or a specific interaction rule, then the box rule is doing none of the actual work and the Foundation is. And the moment the containment team has to keep checking whether the abnormality is behaving properly, SAFE starts becoming difficult to defend. Schadenfreude is key in LobCorp. That tells us he is not considered an overwhelming facility threat during normal operations. But Euclid is not asking whether the abnormality is overwhelming. It's asking whether the Foundation can leave it alone without worrying about what it will do next. For Schadenfreude, the answer is no. Working on this thing requires you to not notice it, and while you're actually working on it, or it escapes. However, after escaping, watching it makes it real simple, so who knows. This one I'm going to butcher, but Der Frischertz is a mercenary who can be hired to fire bullets. Normally, this would help the facility. If it wasn't for that damn 7th bullet rule that messes this whole thing up. That already makes the containment procedure more complicated than simply locking away a weapon and putting a warning sign on the door. That is where SAFE falls apart. The Foundation would need to track every shot, control where he is allowed to fire, and make sure the random 7th bullet doesn't turn a controlled operation into a facility incident. And this is not a target range. This is a one-man firing squad which can wipe out an entire floor of a facility at a time. This is not Bob standing at the end of the hallway with an apple on his head while everyone takes bets on if it hits the apple or vaporizes the poor guy. The Foundation can use Der Frischertz or whatever. It cannot treat him like a predictable firearm, and that lack of predictability makes him Euclid. Scorch Girl is Teth, and this is one of the first placements where the Foundation looks at LobCorp's classification and says, "You gave that damn thing Teth? What the shit?" When Scorch Girl breaches, she marks a random agent prioritizing employees in her own department. She cannot, however, target someone who is currently working inside a containment unit. But then she slowly walks towards the marked employee's room like some sort of It Follows demon, just trying to take out its victim. The target dies, enters the containment unit, or starts working on another abnormality before she reaches them. The mark transfers to someone else. Once she reaches the target's room, a countdown begins. After 5 seconds, boom! She detonates, dealing 300 red damage to every employee in that room. If she cannot target anyone, she walks to a department's main room and explodes there instead. After detonating this mini nuke, she returns to containment. I know it's not technically an apocalyptic entity, but it is absolutely not something the Foundation leaves in a box and fucking forgets about. The containment procedure has to account for target selection, employee movement, room access, and the possibility of a department becoming a fallback target. Teth and Lobotomy Corporation, but Euclid for the Foundation. Red Shoes is he, and the containment problem starts with a counter of 1. The counter lowers after normal or bad work results, or when an ordeal passes through the department, including Violet Dawn. When the counter hits 0, the allurement event begins. Red Shoes enchants an employee with a temperance level of 2 or lower and forces them to walk towards the containment unit. The employee gets a glowing pink face and they march directly towards the shoes. They know where they're going. They are simply no longer in charge of their movements. They are completely controlled by the entity and cannot stop their actions. However, if someone notices, they can slap the shit out of them and break them out of their trance. In Lob, it would just be the manager. In SCP, if someone notices a pink-faced zombie walking by, it's a simple fix. You just have to hope it's the asshole who took your lunch last week for the added perk. If that fails, the employee puts on the shoes and becomes a E-class threat, carrying an axe and starts attacking other employees. This is Euclid because the containment issue is not limited to that room. The abnormality turns a member of staff into the breach. And now the Foundation has to monitor the counter, identify the affected employee, stop the trance, and prevent the employee from reaching the shoes. Containment is possible. It's also one distracted employee from becoming the next Lizzie Borden situation, so it has to be Euclid. Well guys, now we have the Nameless Fetus, which has a QLIF counter of 1, which in this case means he's a very big, easy to set off baby. When the counter hits 0, the fetus starts crying and shrieking. That crying applies constant damage to every employee in the department, gradually lowering the queue of counters of other abnormalities in the same department. So the fetus is not just having a bad day, it makes everyone else have a bad day. And the way you stop it is incredibly normal and emotionally healthy, I swear. You activate its special ability. The game selects an employee or clerk through a roulette style selection. Yes, this is gameplay, but still. That person walks into the containment room where the fetus grabs them, devours them, and restores the counter to 1. That is a manageable procedure. Crying stops because somebody gets to feed the baby. Nameless fetus reaches Euclid because the Foundation cannot treat its containment as passive. The procedure requires constant work management, department monitoring, and a sacrifice option that no reasonable containment team wants to call a standard operating procedure. Managers, the lady facing the wall is Teth, and this is where the low-level placements start becoming genuinely impressive. She does not need to escape to be a problem. Her effect causes severe psychological damage to everyone in the department at once, and it does not matter where they are. An employee can be nowhere near the containment room and can still be affected. They could be in another hallway. They could be in another department. They could be at home asleep in bed. The lady does not care. That is a containment problem because the physical room is not the limit of the abnormality's influence. There is an argument that she could remain safe because she does not escape. And that argument is fair, but the Foundation is not only concerned with whether she leaves her box, it is also concerned with whether the box actually contains the consequences of her behavior. If everyone in a department can be affected at once, regardless of location, Euclid becomes a safer call. I will say this one is close. You can argue the scale of her psychological effects pushes her towards Keter. I'm keeping her in Euclid because the effect is severe, but the abnormality's behavior and containment location remain understandable. Teth, Euclid, and still somehow less convenient than simply facing the wall like she asked. Snow White's apple is the first wall on the list, and the reason she lands in Euclid is that her breach changes the facility around her. When she escapes, she teleports to a random corridor and covers them in thorned vines. Those vines slow agents continuously and deal black damage. That means the Foundation is not dealing with one escape target moving through a hallway. It's dealing with a spreading environmental hazard. The containment team now has to track where she teleports, identify which corridors are covered, distract affected employees, and suppress the abnormality before the facility becomes a maze of hostile vines. She is Juan LobCorp, but she is not automatically Keter. The Foundation can identify the breach behavior, it can prepare for the damage, and it can create a response plan, and has faced off against other entities that do similar stuff, while changing agents into flowers at the same time. She is very dangerous, but she is containable. The all-around helper sounds like the kind of machine that would make your life easier, like your coffee maker, or a robot from something like, I don't know, iRobot. But we all know how that went. And then it escapes, and it turns into a spinning blade with legs. Once it breaches, it takes on an aggressive form with elongated blade limbs. It pauses, it winds up, and then it dashes across the length of the room, dealing red damage to anything in its path. Employees, abnormalities, furniture probably. After the dash, it runs out of power for about 10 seconds before spinning up and doing the whole thing over again. And this is not a normal attack pattern. This is a Beyblade with workplace injury policies just built into it. The Foundation could contain it if it understands the timing and keeps the personnel out of its path. But because the breach creates repeated room-wide movement and requires active suppression windows, safe is not appropriate. The fact that it has a cooldown does not make it friendly. It just gives the response team 10 seconds to regret being assigned to its particular suppression. Beauty and the Beast has one rule: never beat the woman twice in a row. Wait. Anyway, if you do, the creature dies, the employee who performed the second repression work transforms into the next beast. That employee is permanently lost, and the safest way to work with it is to alternate work types. Use insight between repression attempts, or better yet, use insight repeatedly and stop trying to make the situation more goddamn complicated than it already is. This is a Teth abnormality. But the containment procedure is not simply send someone into the room and see what happens. The Foundation has to track the work history and make sure the same type of work does not happen twice consecutively. And I know the Foundation does not need to do any work, and if I wanted these videos to be boring, they would just max out suppression, beat them into eggs, and just stasis them, but that would not be interesting at all, would it? One mistake kills the abnormality and permanently converts the employee into a replacement threat. And there is an argument that this could remain safe because the rules are clear, but if the containment team has to monitor every previous work order to prevent a fatal transformation, Euclid is completely defensible. Redulta of the Slay is he, and Redulta is not seasonal, even though the name sounds seasonal, but trust me guys, it's not. To avoid a breach, the Foundation would need to avoid bad work results and carefully manage the counter. Good work is important because it can raise the counter. Normal and bad results risk lowering it and triggering an escape, and this discount Santa responds best to work in this order: insight, attachment, instinct, and repression. The problem is not that Redulta is impossible to understand. The problem is that the containment depends on consistently getting the management conditions right. That makes it active, conditional, and vulnerable to human error. So, Euclid. This is one of those rare cases of if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck gone wrong, because this thing is not a nice Santa sleigh, and that's for sure. Queen Bee is where I want to make a broader point about this list. A lot of these abnormalities could easily fall into safe if all we did was put them in a box and never work on them. Many of them only become dangerous when the Quillif counter drops to 0. And that is true for Queen Bee. Her counter can drop with a 50% chance after normal work, 70% chance after bad work, and when it reaches 0, she spreads yellow spores across the entire department. The spores infect random nuggets and clerks, and they deal 8 red damage every 2 seconds for about 20 seconds, and if the employee dies from the spores, well, a worker bee violently bursts out of their body. The worker bee is a he-class threat and attacks nearby employees. And if an agent enters the Queen Bee's containment room while she is in a bad mood, she sprays spores directly onto them, dealing physical damage every 1.5 seconds for 20 seconds. So yes, if nobody enters the room and nobody works with her, the procedure looks simple. But the Foundation does not classify abnormalities based on a fantasy where personnel never interact with them. It classifies the things that happen when containment is tested. Queen Bee is Wa, the work bee is he, the spores turn employees into secondary breach. Euclid is an appropriate middle ground because the Foundation can prevent the instant through management, but it cannot ignore what happens when the counter reaches 0. Allruin is Wa with a containment condition that requires very careful management. She prefers cleanliness work. She dislikes violence. Attachment instinct are more acceptable, while repression is heavily penalized. Good and bad work results can drop her counter and trigger an escape, so the goal is to produce a neutral result when possible. That means adjusting employee stats, work duration, or assignment choices to avoid giving her exactly the results she does not want. When she breaches, she teleports around the facility through pink flower-like curtains. If an employee is in the same room, pink petals begin appearing above their head. 1, 2, 3. When the third petal appears, she channels a massive continuous white damage attack, and if the employee's SP reaches 0, they die instantly and become covered in pink curtain. The suppression strategy is hit and run. Send a strike team, deal damage, pull them out as soon as the third petal appears. She may look like a giant pink gummy giraffe, but she runs like an animal that just remembers it owes somebody money, and once she drops her load, poof, she's off again. That contrast is the entire experience. She's a Wa in LobCorp and Euclid here because the rules are understood, but the containment still needs active management, careful timing, and a suppression team that knows when to leave. Punishing Bird is a test, but it is also the smallest argument for Euclid in this entire video. If it stayed in the box and just pecked at somebody once in a while and then, went home, safe would be a perfectly reasonable placement. It does not stay in the box. It escapes, it pecks some people, and then it goes home. And that's the whole problem. Punishing Bird is not a major facility threat. It is more of a tiny nuisance with wings. But the SCP system is about containment, and you cannot call something safe when it repeatedly, consistently refuses to remain contained. And even if its escape behavior is more irritating than catastrophic, Punishing Bird is not dangerous enough to be Keter, and it's not reliable enough to be safe. Euclid, a tiny Euclid, or like a flying containment violation. King of Greed is a hottie sealed in amber. When it escapes, it can teleport around the facility and it eats everything in its path. The worst part is it can only be attacked from behind safely, so the Foundation needs anti-teleportation technology, a suppression team capable of tracking its movements, and a lot of carefully placed backshot fire. That is not an abnormality you surround in a hallway and calmly point weapons at. It appears somewhere else, it eats whatever's in front of it, and then the response team has to reposition and attack from behind before it teleports again. The Foundation can make a plan for it. The plan is just going to involve a lot of people staring at the backside of a monster and hoping it doesn't turn around. King of Greed is not Keter because the breach has a known suppression rule, but safe? Absolutely not. The Little Prince creates a containment problem through its spore system. Every time an employee works with it, they gain 1 spore. Working with another abnormality removes 1 spore. The counter can decrease when an employee performs 3 consecutive non-insight works, and it also drops after a bad work result. If one employee accumulates 5 spores, the counter immediately drops to 0. When the containment procedure fails, the results involve mind control. That means the Foundation is not only watching the abnormality, it's tracking the condition of every employee who interacts with it, who has worked with the Prince, how many spores do they have they performed enough work to be clear of them? Are they approaching the threshold? And that's a lot of paperwork for one little Prince. The facility can contain it, but containment requires an active record keeping and a lot of careful staff rotation. Letita is he, but the danger comes from how easily her effects can move through personnel. The abnormality creates an interaction that appears manageable until the employee carries the consequences somewhere else. That makes containment dependent on information, control, and personnel screening. The Foundation would need to track who entered the room, what they received, and whether they brought anything out with them. That is a classic Euclid problem. The object can remain contained, but the effects of interacting with it may not stay in the room. Letita is also the kind of abnormality that gets people killed because it looks approachable. The Foundation would put up warnings, someone would ignore the warnings, then the warnings would become longer, then someone would ignore the longer warnings, and even after seeing their friend torn apart from like a chest burster from aliens that have come out of them, for not following the rules, they would still fucking not follow the warnings. Dream of the Black Swan is a WA whose counter is connected to the general condition of the facility. Its counter can drop after a bad work result. It can also drop after a normal work result. Then there's the broader facility conditions. 5 employee deaths in 1 day, excluding execution bullet kills. 5 employee panics in 1 day. 1 or 3 more abnormalities breaching in 1 day. Once the relevant conditions are met, the counter reaches 0. The hostile sister entity escapes. The facility is not only managing Dream of the Black Swan directly, it's managing the entire facility around it. Others breach, employees' death, panics, and work results. The abnormality is effectively monitoring how badly the workplace is going and waiting for the building to become miserable enough. And that is Euclid because containment can be maintained through careful management, but the trigger conditions aren't broad enough that the entire facility becomes part of the damn problem. But I will be willing to listen to you argue for Keter here also. Void Dream is Teth and a major pain in the ass. The Foundation would have to send employees around at the end of every day and wake up sleeping staff before they die. While contained, Void Dream periodically shoots balls of light to the facility. Any employee hit by one of these lights falls asleep on a floating cloud. You can wake them by repeatedly clicking on them in-game. For SCP employees, it's another chance to slap people around for fun. There's also a direct management rule. Never send an employee with a temperance below level 2 to work with Void Dream. If you do, they fall asleep in containment unit and they die. That is why Void Dream reaches Euclid, not because it's the strongest abnormality in the facility, because the containment plan requires active intervention, employee screening, and somebody checking whether the entire department has fallen asleep. At the end of every day, the Foundation sends teams through the halls, not to fight a breach, but to slap sleeping employees awake, making this the most aggressively hostile bedtime routine here. Normally it's like, take a shower, brush your teeth. Oh, and with this, don't forget to slap Greg, he's on cloud 9 again. The dreaming current is a wand. The breach conditions are much more specific than the name suggests. The Q counter reaches 0 under 2 conditions. First, an employee with a temperance level of 1 completes work sessions with it, or second, an agent panics while inside the containment room, and that's it. Send somebody with terrible temperance into the room, or allow someone to panic inside, and the current is ready to ruin the afternoon. When it breaches, it covers hallways with liquid that slows employees by 50%, and then it just runs back and forth through the halls, dealing damage to people. So the Foundation now has a fast-moving hallway hazard, a slowing field, and a target selection problem. That is why the employee stat requirements matter. The abnormality is not randomly deciding to become a problem. The containment procedure is failing under 2 very specific conditions. Still, those conditions are not exactly difficult to trigger in Lobotomy Corporation, where somebody panicking in your room is basically part of a daily schedule. The Foundation can contain it. It has clear rules. It has predictable breach patterns, but it requires careful employee selection and immediate hallway control. This motherfucker. Meat Lantern is Teth, and this is one of the strongest arguments that a low Lob Corp threat level does not automatically mean safe. To prevent Meat Lantern from breaching, the work session must last at least 40 seconds. If it finishes before that, its counter instantly drops to 0. And this thing annoyed the shit out of me on my first run through the game. I lost so many damn nuggets to it, my god. You also have to send an employee with a temperance level 2 or lower, send somebody with an excessively high temperance, and the Meat Lantern breaches even if the work lasted longer than 40 seconds. So the abnormality is punishing you for doing work too efficiently with the wrong employee. Wonderful. When Meat Lantern escapes, it burrows underground into a nearby hallway, often near another containment cell, and it just waits. Only the glowing flower, a few teeth are visible. Like godforsaken anglerfish, it uses its flower as a lure. Any agent, clerk, or any other abnormality that walks over it is instantly swallowed and killed. It does not need to chase anyone. It does not need to run through the facility. It simply hides in the floor and waits someone to make the wrong step. You can suppress it, but you should never send melee units or employees against it because they're just food. They will walk directly into its instant kill range. Use your American agents with guns to eliminate it from a distance. This is where I will admit Meat Lantern can be argued into Keter. Its camouflage skills are absurd, its breach location is unpredictable, and it attacks with an instant kill. And the containment team has to deliberately avoid using normal methods of sending people into suppressed and escaped abnormality. I'm keeping it in Euclid for this list because the breach can be safely handled with the correct ranged response, but if you want to argue Keter for Meat Lantern, you have a very strong case. This thing is a landmine pretending to be a flower. The dimensional refraction variant is a WA whose defining trait is that it's almost completely invisible. The Q counter drops under 2 conditions. A bad work result lowers it, and if the work process takes longer than 20 seconds, the counter decreases. That means the Foundation has to manage both quality of work and the clock. When it breaches, it appears as a barely visible floating vacuum-like distortion. It looks like rippling air. Employees cannot automatically detect it. They will not attack unless you manually order them to target the distortion itself. It does not display a health bar while breaching, and it is a pain in the ass in gas form. So the Foundation is fighting an enemy that is almost invisible, has a hidden health, and is not automatically detected by personnel, and requires someone to manually point at a patch of rippling air and say, "Shoot that!" The distortion also creates a lethal vacuum inside its containment unit. Any biological entity in the relevant range dies from asphyxiation. Passing through it during a breach deals 40 red damage to employees. There is one reason I'm not putting this in Keter. After exactly 3 minutes, it automatically returns to its containment chamber. That timer gives the Foundation a reliable emergency endpoint. It can evacuate the area, manually target the distortion, and wait for the anomaly to return. But the containment process is still a nightmare. You cannot see it properly, you cannot track it properly, and if you forget where it is, it can turn a hallway into a vacuum cleaner with a kill count. Very close to Keter, but I'm keeping it here. Porcubus is a he that relies on strict stat checks. Your agent needs temperance level 4 or higher to work with it safely. Send someone below that threshold and the consequences are immediate and dire. If an employee with a temperance level 3 or lower gets a good work result, they die. That is one of the strangest punishments in the entire facility. The employee did well, murder it. It congratulates them by killing them. A bad work result lowers the Q count. If it breaches and targets an agent with a temperance level 3 or lower, it deals massive white damage. If the attack causes the employee to panic, they die instantly, laughing madly before their head bursts, like that scene from Scanners. And once Porcupus breaches, it continues attacking until it's suppressed or the day ends. The suppression has another catch. Porcupus is completely immune to attacks outside of its direct reach. You have to send employees into its immediate attack range and use melee weapons, so it's the opposite of Meat Lantern. So the Foundation needs high temperance personnel to work with it, high temperance personnel to survive its breach attack, and melee personnel willing to stand directly beside the thing that explodes your head when you panic. Porcupus is Euclid because the rules are strict and dangerous, but they're also clearly defined. Use the wrong employee and the abnormality turns the staffing department into a Darwin Award ceremony. Parasite tree is Juan. This is where the word blessing becomes legally suspicious. Its Q counter decreases when you perform repression work. Also drop when another abnormality breaches. And if you complete 5 works with other abnormalities while ignoring it, it also decreases. So neglecting the tree is dangerous. Working with the tree is dangerous. The tree grants the employees a positive stat boost, increasing work speed and SP gain. The 5 employees who receive the blessings, begin to panic. Shortly afterwards, spikes are ripping through them, killing them instantly and transforming their bodies into hostile saplings that emit a fatal toxin. That's not a blessing. That's a delayed subscription to meta. The most important part is that the affected employees can be interrupted. While a blessed employee is slowly being mind controlled and walking towards the tree's containment room, pause the game, rapidly click on them to break the effect. Yes. More slap a bitch content from our favorite game. You also need to watch the bud count, work with the tree just enough to keep it pacified, but do not casually farm the stat boosts until 5 people are walking around with botanical death sentences. Execution bullets can also be used on charmed clerks if they wander too close. Parasite Tree is worse than Cherry Blossom. Parasite Tree gives 5 employees a stat boost, waits until everyone's feeling good about themselves, and then turns them into poisonous baby trees. And that is Euclid with a serious argument for going higher. Clouded Monk is Wah, that punishes bad work, normal work, and general collapses of the facility. Bad work results in lower of the counter, normal work results in that as well, and 10 employees die in the facility and his containment immediately breaches. If Yin breaches, so does he. He crawls towards Yin's location just to attack it. Because apparently the facility did not have enough problems, so now the abnormalities are starting personal feuds with each other and trying to fist fight in the hallways. Insight work is the preferred method of managing him. A successful insight work heals the employee for 15 SP. That gives the Foundation a practical way to keep him stable while restoring the mental health of the worker assigned to him. When Cloud Monk breaches, he transforms and crawls through the facility dealing red damage. Every so often, stops and starts charging his attack. It's unblockable and it deals massive amounts of red damage, and employees need to be moved out of the room fucking pronto. Do not stand there and test the monk's patience. He has already reached the "you're fucked" part of the conversation. Cloud Monk is Euclid because his breach conditions are broad, his movements are dangerous, and his Yin interaction can create immediate secondary incidents. But the rules are still understandable, so Euclid. I don't know how to say this one, guys, but Papa Day is just a cute little puppy. Trust me, look at him, look at that face. That is the face of an innocent animal who has never done anything wrong in his entire life. You can trust me. This is absolutely not set up for terrible containment decisions, guys. That would be how you end up with a containment document titled Incident Report. We let the puppy do whatever it wanted. The dog looks harmless. That makes personnel more likely to underestimate the rules around it and improvise during work. The Foundation would use restricted handlers, clear interaction procedures, and a simple rule that nobody is allowed to treat the containment room like a damn petting zoo. The important point is not raw destructive power. It's whether the containment team can trust employees to interact with the abnormality correctly every single time. Poday is tough, Poday is cute, Poday is also Euclid. Trust me. Firebird is Juan. Its entire management system revolves around its Q counter. The counter ranges from 1 to 3. It decreases when another abnormality in the same department breaches. It also decreases when you get good work results. A bad work result will increase the count. If the counter is at 1, or if an employee's HP is below 20%, Firebird heals you guys of both physical and mental health. That sounds helpful. And then you remember this is Lobotomy Corporation, so the healing bird is also one bad management decision away from becoming a bonfire in the middle of your facility. If the counter reaches 0, it breaches, it ignites into a fiery phoenix, and passively just deals damage to everyone in the room. When attacked, it blinds the employee who hit it until it completes another task. Employees wearing Judgment Bird's ego, though, are immune to that. And if the employee dies or panics, they burst into flames and ignite nearby employees, doing white damage to them all. So yes, Firebird is Euclid. But you want to know the funniest part? Something we put in the safe category can straight up murk you if you're caught wearing Firebird's ego, and that is Snow Queen. Go watch the previous video if you haven't seen it to understand those mechanics. Firebird is Euclid because the counter mechanics are understandable. The breach can be suppressed, but the Foundation needs to manage the counter. Control the department, prevent chain reaction deaths, make sure nobody treats the healing phoenix like a free health station, and you're good. Oh, finally, we're on the last one. Fragment of the Universe is another test that reaches Euclid because its interaction rules are too strange and conditional for passive containment. Personnel need to understand what they are dealing with before they begin work. If employees cannot reliably predict how the entity will respond, then the facility needs active procedures around every interaction, and this screams Euclid. The abnormality can be contained, but the containment team has to try paying attention. Fragment of the Universe does not need to be the most destructive entity on this list. The Foundation is not awarding object classes based on who can destroy the most walls. It's asking whether the rules stay stable when the anomaly is left alone. For Fragment of the Universe, the answer is uncertain enough to land it in Euclid, and honestly, Fragment of the Universe is already a name that makes containment teams wish somebody else had picked the damn name. And if you're still here after 27 abnormalities, first of all, thank you. Second, this is exactly why I had to split the series into 3 videos. If you like how I did this breakdown in this video, let me know, or if you would prefer something more like what I did in the safe video for Keter, also let me know so I don't have to struggle through a 20+ page script next week. If I had put safe Euclid Keter into one upload, this episode alone would have become a feature-length documentary about my poor decision-making skills. If you think I got one of these placements wrong, leave a comment. Be specific, because wrong is technically feedback, but it does not give me much to work with. Tell me which abnormality should move, which containment rules should change your mind, especially if you think Meat Lantern belongs in Keter, because that one is going to start some arguments. And if you think the Sapience thing automatically means Euclid, bring an actual containment argument with you. Don't just point out the abnormality and say it can think. That is how you get roasted in the comments by somebody who has actually read the object class guide. The Euclid list is where the difference between LobCorp and the Foundation becomes impossible to ignore. LobCorp's threat level tells us how dangerous the abnormality is inside its work system. The SCP Foundation's object class tells us how reliable containment is when people are trying to keep the abnormality contained. That's why Pope a Day can look like a cute little puppy and still deserve containment protocol that prevents employees from making the worst possible decisions. And that is why Sapience needs to be treated as evidence and not an automatic verdict. A thinking abnormality can be safe if its behavior is reliably contained. A non-sapient abnormality can be Euclid if its behavior is too unpredictable. The Foundation is not asking whether the abnormality looks intelligent, it's asking whether the box still works when nobody is holding it shut. Some of these abnormalities might still be argued into safe if the Foundation never interacts with them, but that's not how Lobotomy Corporation operates. The moment employees have to do work with them, the moment the Q counter can drop, the moment one bad result creates a department-wide incident, the classification becomes much harder to defend. That is Euclid. Not necessarily the strongest, not necessarily the most destructive, and just unreliable enough that the Foundation cannot stop paying attention to it. Next week we deal with Keter abnormalities. That is where the containment procedures stop being follow these rules carefully and start being hope the facility survives long enough to make the rules matter. That episode is going to include the abnormalities that do not merely punish bad management, they punish the existence of the building, the planet, and sometimes existence itself. So subscribe if you want to see where the A-lists and the worst of the WAs end up, and leave your arguments for this list down below. And, like always guys, be good to each other. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.